morning, everybody. Longhorn fans everywhere. Welcome in to a Tuesday night edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Grateful to have you guys in on a Tuesday night. I am in Houston, Texas, coming to you live. We have a bunch of Texas Longhorn talk to get into tonight. We know that the Texas Longhorns, the football team, is in the college football playoff in the 10th and final year of the 14 playoff, and that is exciting. We are 20 days away from Texas against Washington on New Year's Day. 20 days away. But before we can really talk about the game, there are other things that are hot on the streets right now in the world of Texas Longhorns. Transfer portal. Recruiting, as signing day is next Wednesday. That is a huge deal. Signing day is next Wednesday. That is when, if you don't know, the recruits for the 2024 class will sign their national letters of intent. They've been committed. You got to get them to sign, though. They're not locked in until they sign. To be clear, there are 2 signing days, which we will clarify later on. But we've got transfer portal. We've got recruiting updates. Who is going to be a Longhorn in the transfer portal? We've got all of that covered. We're also going to try to talk some college basketball at the end if time provides. So thank you guys for tuning in. We've got a loaded show. We need to jump right into things right now. So welcome in. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, do all of that stuff that we ask you to do. We greatly appreciate that. I will go ahead and throw this link out to Emmy in case he decides he wants to join. But as we talked about in our last episode, his work schedule has ramped up. He got a really special opportunity. So he won't be on as often as he was here the past couple of months as we've been rolling on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. This is our first episode this week here on Tuesday evening. I want to start the show after I take a sip from my beautiful mug right here, the mysterious liquid inside of it. I want to start the show by giving a shout out to Texas women's volleyball. Yes, that's right. Texas women's volleyball. I want to give a shout out to the Texas women's volleyball team as they defeated number 1 seed Stanford this past Saturday in the Stanford Regional Final on Stanford's home court to advance, to win the Stanford Regional and to advance to the Final Four of the Texas volleyball or the NCAA volleyball tournament. They are returning to the Final Four. Remember, in case you don't know, actually, the Texas women's volleyball team are the defending national champions. They were the 2 seed in the Stanford Regional, and they defeated Stanford. They defeated Tennessee and Stanford to win the Stanford Regional to advance to the Final Four for the 2nd straight year, and they are now 2 wins away from going back-to-back. And I watched that Texas volleyball team, and man, are they impressive. I mean, I don't know much about volleyball, but I could talk about them all day. They are impressive. They advanced to the Final Four and are now 2 wins away from a national championship, and they will play Wisconsin on Thursday night. I don't know who plays Thursday night football. I don't know what NBA games are on that night, but I'm going to be tuning into some of that game. It's a big game. Wisconsin is a 1 seed. If Texas wants to win the national championship, they're going to have to do something pretty unprecedented, as they're going to have to defeat 3 consecutive 1 seeds. Because I believe the Final Four is 3 1 seeds and then Texas, who's a 2 seed. So shout out to the Texans women's volleyball team, specifically outside hitter Madison Skinner, who is in her 2nd year after transferring from Kentucky. She's absolutely fantastic. She's a killer. She transferred into Texas at the beginning of last year from Kentucky after winning a national championship with Kentucky, wins a national championship with Texas last year, and then in the Stanford Regional, just this past weekend, wins Stanford Regional's most outstanding player, totaling 24 kills while hitting 38%. Texas won the match against Stanford in Palo Alto, 25-16. They took the first set. They lose the second set, 25-15. But from there, they really took control, 25-19 third set, 25-22, in what was a pretty close fourth set to win the Stanford Regional. They win it in 4 sets, and they're moving on to the Final Four for the 15th time in Texas volleyball program history and the 11th time in the past 16 years. That's incredible. That's what you call a dominant program. So give it up for the Texas women's volleyball team, and I will certainly be tuning in to the Final Four, as they are now 26-4 on the entire season, and they have reached the Final Four once again. And just a little tidbit before we get into some football talk. In the 10-year time period where we've had the 4-team college football playoff, there has never been a school to make the 4-team college football playoff and the Final Four in volleyball in the same year until this year, where Texas has now accomplished that feat. So pretty cool. Just a nugget I wanted to throw out there. I find it cool. If you don't, well, now you know. So with all that being said, I thought that would be worthy of talking about. Texas sports, man, right now they're a wagon, and that volleyball team is probably the biggest wagon of them all. Led by Madison Skinner and, of course, Asia O'Neal, who's also fantastic in her own right. Take another sip. Welcome in once again. I'm going to go into the weeds of recruiting and transfer portal here over the next couple of weeks. Signing day is next Wednesday, December 20th. And as I mentioned to kick off the show, that is where these recruits, most of them, it's early signing day. It's now where most of these high school players sign their national letters of intent. Some will wait until National Signing Day number 2, which occurs first week of February. And those are special cases. But most of these players are going to sign next Wednesday. And that's a big deal. Signing day is always a big deal. So next week, it's going to be a lot of recruiting. And we're going to have a signing day special, which will probably go about 2.5 hours. I don't know what day that will be yet, but we're going to break it all down. It's going to be fun. Trust me. But we've got some recruiting talk that we got to get to right now, considering that signing day is basically a week away. It's Tuesday night, basically a week from tomorrow. So, to set the stage, Texas right now, for their 2024 recruiting class, coming off back-to-back top 5 classes under Steve Sarkisian, according to Rivals.com, which is the industry site that we will be using and referencing for tonight. There are others out there, and we will put them all together next week when we break the entire class down for signing day. But for right now and for tonight, since I didn't have time to compile all that data, we're going to just be referencing the Rivals.com rankings. Right now, as it stands right now, Texas for the 2024 class has 20 total commits as of right now, and they rank fifth. Their class would rank fifth in the country if everything stopped right now. Fifth in the Rivals.com recruiting rankings. And if everything finished as it is right now with 20 total commits on the Longhorns side or in the Longhorns' favor, they would finish with the third straight top 5 class. And with the insight that I'm getting, with what I'm reading, with what I'm hearing, they can move even higher than that. And we'll get into that here in just a minute. The schools ahead of them right now are Georgia, number 1, of course. Ohio State, number 2. Doesn't surprise me. Florida State, number 3. Alabama, number 4. I mean, does that really surprise anybody? Georgia, Ohio State, Florida, Florida State, Texas, with Miami trailing Texas. But what I will point out is that those 4 schools, they all have more commitments than Texas does right now in their class. Georgia with 28 total commits. Ohio State with 22 total commits. Florida State with 23 total commits. And Alabama with 21 total commits. And Texas has more 5-stars, according to Rivals, than 2 of those schools, Florida State and Alabama. So here's how the Texas class breaks down. According to Rivals.com, and it is different for On3, it's different for ESPN, which I don't really look at, and it's also different for 24/7 or 247, whatever you call it. 20 total commits. Texas has 3 5-stars, 12 4-stars, and 4 3-stars for a total of 2,615 points. That ranks 5th in the recruiting class as of tonight, right now, when we are speaking right now. So now that you know and we've set the stage a little bit, let's get into what you guys really want to know. How is this recruiting class going to potentially finish up for the Longhorns here in the next week? Well, we got to start with tomorrow. Tomorrow, one of the best players, one of the best prospects, high school players left on the board who has yet to make his commitment, has taken it all the way to basically the finish line, is going to make his decision tomorrow afternoon, late tomorrow afternoon, around 4:15, 4:20 p.m. His name is Kobe Black. And if you're a Texas Longhorn fan, you need to know this name. Because if he commits to Texas, he will be one of the best players in this class. And he's an important guy for this Texas class. Like, I think Texas really would like and needs to get him in this class. Kobe Black. Very cool name, by the way. Kobe Black. He is a high 4-star, borderline 5-star prospect across basically all industries. He's very highly regarded. High 4-star, borderline 5-star. And when the final recruiting rankings come out, I think sometime in the new year, I think he will finish as a 5-star prospect. Like, he's that good. From Waco Connolly High School. Waco Connolly, he's a Texas kid. High 4-star, basically borderline 5-star. I'm calling him a 5-star. He's taken his recruitment the distance. He's going to make his college announcement tomorrow afternoon at a ceremony at Waco Connolly High School. And, you know, he's good size, 6'2", 190 pounds, high 4-star, making his decision tomorrow. Let's give you some background information. What is this coming down to? The finalists, his 5 finalists, were Texas, That's why we're talking about it, of course. Texas A&M, LSU, Oregon, and Oklahoma State. Texas, Texas A&M, LSU, Oregon, and Oklahoma State. Now, here's an interesting note. His brother, Corey Black, is or was a junior this year, a junior defensive back who played for Oklahoma State this year. And Kobe has taken visits to Oklahoma State because, of course, his brother plays at Oklahoma State. Corey Black is a very good college player. He's in that Oklahoma State secondary, and he's going to be a senior next year, so he has another year of eligibility. A&M has kind of been the sleeper in this recruitment, but it feels like to me, even with those schools, considering everything I just told you, with Texas, Texas A&M, LSU, Oregon, and Oklahoma State being the real 5 finalists, this is coming down to Texas and Oklahoma State. I would be very surprised, and I think people throughout the recruiting industry would be very, very surprised if he doesn't announce for either Texas or Oklahoma State tomorrow afternoon when he announces his commitment. He knows where he's going, but he's kept it very low key. There's been very little drama in this recruitment. Typically, when a recruit of his echelon, of his caliber, takes his recruitment all the way to December, right up until basically signing day, there's some drama that goes on. But this has been very low key, and the 2 favorites are Texas and Oklahoma State, with industry sourcing heavily favoring Texas. And I think Texas has been the favorite since about the summer when Kobe Black made an official visit to Texas. And coming out of that visit, the sentiment was, and has been ever since, that Texas is the leader, the heavy leader in this recruitment. And unless something has changed that we don't know about, I expect Texas to land Kobe Black into this class. Very important piece. Very important piece. He'd be a very important part of the recruiting class. Very highly regarded player. He's, I think, a top 10 prospect in the state of Texas. His last official visit that he took was to Texas. He's taken some unofficials to Oklahoma State, but I think that's more so to go and watch his brother. And the interesting part of this is, with some of Texas' needs potentially going into next year in the secondary, could Black potentially flip to Texas? Would Corey Black be a guy that Texas would maybe take along with his brother Kobe Black going into next year if Kobe does announce his decision to Texas? We don't know that. We haven't heard anything about that yet, but it's something to keep an eye on. So I expect, along with everyone, the mods throughout the recruiting industry, the insight is telling us that Texas has been the favorite for a while, and we expect Texas, I expect Texas, based on everything I'm hearing, to land Kobe Black, and he'd immediately become a top 3, top 4 player in this recruiting cycle for the Longhorns. Of course, Colin Simmons is on top of that food chain, and there are some other really, really good players. Ryan Wingo's a guy who Amy and I had a discussion about when he committed a couple weeks to a month back. He's still locked in with Texas. Brandon Baker's a guy who we really haven't broken down yet, but he's an offensive tackle from, I think, the state of California, who's now a 5-star in the rival services rankings. Borderline 5-star across all, services. Now you add Kobe Black to that equation in the secondary with another player I'm about to talk about here in a minute, who's committed to a school but might flip, we could be looking at another top 3 class for Texas. Kobe Black would probably move them up maybe a spot or 2 in some of the services. But now we got to talk about Xavier Filsaime. Xavier Filsaime. He's another name that you Texas fans need to know here as we lead up to signing day. Xavier Filsaime. Need to know this name. Why is that? Well, Xavier Filsaime is a safety prospect from McKinney, Texas. I believe he went to McKinney High School. I'll double check on that. But as I mentioned, we're 1 week from the early signing period. And Xavier Filsaime, he is like Kobe Black, high 4-star, borderline 5-star prospect in the rival services. He's a 5-star elsewhere, and I'm considering him a 5-star. I think if Texas were to get him by the end of the 2024 cycle, Xavier Filsaime, when the final rankings come out, just like Kobe Black, would be a 5-star prospect. But Xavier Filsaime has been committed to Florida for quite some time. Let me take a sip of my mysterious liquid in this beautiful white mug before I continue. Xavier Filsaime has been committed to Florida. But based on recent intel and some crystal balls that have been given out or thrown out there by experts, recruiting experts in the industry who have much better sourcing and are more plugged in than even I am, they expect or they think that Texas is trending to flip the McKinney 5-star safety or borderline 5-star safety off his commitment from the Gators for a variety of reasons. Think about the situation at Florida. Things went south there again this year. They've already lost a couple important commitments in that recruiting class who have flipped, including one previously to the Longhorns who we'll talk about later next week. And Filsaime has been a target for Texas. Texas has continued to work and chip away at him or in his recruitment, I guess you would call it, ever since he has been verbally committed to Florida. Texas hasn't given up on this recruitment. And that's one of the things I really wanted to drive home on this podcast that Texas fans need to understand. One of the things that this staff under Steve Sarkisian has specialized in recruiting of high school talent has been the ability to recruit through the whistle. Recruit through the whistle. Something that previous coaching staffs at Texas didn't always do. Tom Herman, Charlie Strong, they weren't the best at this. Let's just call it how it is. Steve Sarkisian and his staff have figured out the guy commits, we don't have to give up until he puts ink to paper and signs his national letter of intent at said school that he's committed to. Recruit him. That's totally illegal. So, my point is, one of the reasons Texas has done so well in recruiting is they've been able to flip some very, very good players. Players that you know as Texas fans that probably wouldn't be Longhorns if it weren't for the workings behind the scenes of this Texas coaching staff. We go back to 2022, coming off the 5-7 season. Kelvin Banks is committed to Oregon. Now, there were some extenuating circumstances that contributed to him flipping to Texas, but Steve Sarkisian and his staff with Kyle Flood continued to chip away at Kelvin Banks throughout his recruitment, even leading up to the firing or the change it at the head coach position. And they were able to flip Kelvin Banks, who's a key cog on this Texas championship football team. Texas isn't where it is right now without Kelvin Banks, and you can't tell me otherwise. Last year, Texas flips Anthony Hill, 5-star linebacker prospect out of Denton, Texas, Denton Ryan High School, up in the Dallas Metroplex area. They flip him as he was committed to Texas A&M. And what made that a little sweeter was, of course, that he was committed to Aggie, and Texas was able to flip him. And it's always a little sweeter when you're able to flip a guy of that, especially of that caliber, from a rival. I mean, you just get to rub it in a little bit more. But those are just two examples. This staff, they might do it again. And the insight throughout the industry is that they are going to flip Xavier Filsaime, and they're going to get Cbb'S Black. So if you're big into recruiting, if you follow this, if you're really following what's going on in the program, in this Texas football program, and why it is where it is right now, as one of the 4 teams that's in the college football playoff competing for a national championship, one of the reasons is because the work behind the scenes that this coaching staff is doing in recruiting. It's one of the pillars of being a great pro in college football. Not just recruiting guys. Texas could go out and get 30 high school players in a week. Easily. It's about getting the right guys, though, and recruiting the best of the best. You're the University of Texas. You recruit the best of the best. We want to be a championship program, says Steve Sarkisian, and he's recruiting these types of players. And I think they're going to flip Xavier Filsaime. He's been committed to the Gators since April 13th, but he's taken visits to USC and Texas in the last 2 months. And the sense is that Florida was going to have an in-home visit with him tonight. They just hired a new defensive backs coach, which is some changes on that coaching staff are a big reason why he's considering even flipping his commitment. They've had some changes on that coaching staff. The new coaching staff, the new position coach, is visiting with Xavier Filsaime, or he was supposed to be, tonight. Texas is going to have an in-home with him, I think, tomorrow or Thursday, and he's going to come in to Austin to make an official visit this Friday through this Sunday. And I think if he takes that visit, which he has scheduled, it'll be very telling of what his plans are leading up to signing day next Wednesday, and that's to flip to Texas. And if Texas can get those 2 guys alone, 2 borderline 5-star guys, I think there's a good chance they finish with another top 3 class here in 2024. Something I wouldn't have told you 2 months ago. So that's just the start of recruiting and transfer portal intel I have for you right now. Cbb'S Black and Xavier Filsaime are 2 names to keep an eye on leading up to signing day. And, of course, I think they're going to get Cbb'S Black tomorrow. That's when he announces his decision. They get those 2 guys, I think Texas will be a top 3 recruiting class once again. So, pretty exciting times in the University of Texas recruiting. Again, we're going to have so much more on recruiting, breaking down the 24 class, going into next week, Next week's signing day, we'll do a signing day special, hopefully. Hopefully we can get Emmy on for some of that. We're going to have more content throughout the week, this week in particular, on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. So make sure you stay tuned in for all of that. When you talk a lot, you get thirsty. All right. So I think that's really all I need to cover from a recruiting standpoint for right now. There's another name that I would get into, but we can address it when or if that comes to fruition. It's not as big as Xavier Filsaime or Kobe Black. So let's talk about the transfer portal. Let's shift our focus of discussion from recruiting to the transfer portal. Oh gosh, where do I even start with this one? I know where I want to start. One of the big targets, because I want to talk about targets and also players that Texas might potentially be targeting in the transfer portal, as it just opened just over a week ago. Last Monday, I believe it opened, the 4th. One of the things that needs to be pointed out to start off this conversation, at the end of this season, after, say, the playoff, say Texas maybe wins the semifinal game against Washington, they go on to win the national championship. Regardless of the outcome, though, of what's going to happen in the college football playoff from a Longhorn standpoint, the expectation is that after the season is over, in the short to immediate aftermath of whatever that is for Texas, it's that, as of course, a couple of Texas receivers in Isaiah Nair and Casey Kane, who weren't getting significant playing time and weren't really players on this year's Texas team, have already entered the transfer portal. It's expected that the three main contributors at the Texas wide receiver position for this year will leave. We expect Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell to enter the NFL draft. So the expectation throughout the industry is pretty much they're gone. They're going to the NFL. They're going to be first or second round picks. They're off to the NFL after this year. And that was the sense coming into this year. And Jordan Whittington is out of eligibility. This was his last year. He came back for this year. Great for him. He's really come on the past couple weeks. He's had a great career. Everyone loves Jordan Whittington. He may or may not end up in the NFL. We wish him the best of luck. But he's graduating, so he won't be back next year. So Texas is losing a lot, point being, at the wide receiver position. Yeah, the expectation is that both Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell will announce their intentions to head to the NFL, coupled with the departure of Jordan Whittington, and that's going to leave the Longhorns very short on experience, in particular, at the wide receiver position. Really short on experience, let alone proven experience for that matter. Here's what we need to look at. Considering that scenario, which is very, very likely, unless Adonai Mitchell were to decide to come back to Texas next year. Considering the most likely scenario, those three guys leave, that leaves, going into 2024, Texas with 6 bodies at the wide receiver position going into next year. 6 bodies. No seniors, no juniors, 2 sophomores, 1 redshirt freshman, and 3 true freshmen who are coming in this year's recruiting class, the 2024 recruiting class, who we were just talking about. Again, in this scenario, 6 scholarship wide receivers on the Texas roster after this year, with Whittington, Worthy, and Mitchell all leaving or expected to leave. No seniors, no juniors, only 2 sophomores. Those would be Jonte Cook going into next year and DeAndre Moore going into next year. 1 redshirt freshman, which would be Ryan Niblett, who redshirted this year. And then 3 true freshmen, the 3 true freshmen in this recruiting class who we'll talk more about later on this week and going into next week. Freddie Dubose, Parker Livingstone, and Ryan Wingo, the big one. Those would be 3 true freshmen. So they would have 2 sophomores, 1 redshirt freshman, and 3 true freshmen, 2 of which are coming off some injuries. So when you really consider it, they would really have 4 healthy bodies going into the spring, the early parts of spring, at the wide receiver position. Those would be Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, who would both be sophomores, Ryan Niblett, and Ryan Wingo. Now, those are good young players. Those were highly recruited guys. But considering all of that, Texas would have 8 total career catches at the college level in their wide receiver room at the end of this year. So there is a big need, and all those 8 catches have come from Jonte Cook, of course. There's a big need at the wide receiver position in the portal, in the transfer portal for Texas. They need to go out and they need to get at least 2 bodies, 2 experienced, good college football players at the wide receiver position in the transfer portal. And that's the expectations. They will go out and get at least 2 receivers in the portal. It's a big need because of what I just explained to you. They might even need 3 wide receivers in the portal. And it wouldn't surprise me if they do get 3. But with Ryan Wingo coming in, I think it'll most likely be 2 with some of their other needs. So, with all that being said, that makes sense. But who are we really looking at here for Texas in the portal? Like, what are the names that we need to know? We've heard about Antoine Juice Wells, who has entered the portal from South Carolina. Wasn't really healthy this year, but was, I think, all SEC first team as a freshman. Really good player. We've heard there is some traction on the Texas side there. And I think he's expected to maybe visit Ole Miss. I think he's probably going to take a visit to Texas before things are all said and done. He's a really good player. He just hasn't really – he had an injury this year, and that's really the only real question mark there. But Texas were to get him, that'd be one. That's one body that they would, I think, be interested in, and there might be interest there, and he could be one of those guys that Texas goes and looks at in the portal or brings in through the portal. The big name, though, that I'm focused on right now from a wide receiver position standpoint, who just officially entered the portal today, and you might recognize this name if you are a Longhorn fan and you've been watching this football team this year. Matthew Golden. Get to know the name Matthew Golden. He was a wide receiver at the University of Houston this year. And I think He's probably a big piece to this puzzle. 4:22 p.m. today, he tweeted out, "I am officially in the portal," on X or Twitter or whatever you call it now these days. He used to be high school teammates with a couple of players on the Texas roster currently, including Texas running back Jaden Blue. They were high school teammates. Blue, shortly thereafter, tweeted out the eyes emoji. That's used very often in the recruiting streets on the Twitter sphere. The expectation is, or what we've been hearing, is that behind the scenes, Matthew Golden has been doing his research on the Texas program. He's been reaching out to guys he knows on the Texas roster who he played with in high school and other guys to inquire about the Texas program. I think there's mutual interest there. If you watched the Texas-Houston game this year, Matthew Golden was a big part and big reason why not only Houston was in that game, as I think he scored 2 touchdowns in that game, and he went wild on the Texas secondary, but he was a big reason why Texas was struggling to cover. He's a really good receiver. He's excellent on special teams. I think at the very least what he would give Texas is somewhat comparable production to one Xavier Worthy on special teams as like a kick punt returner. And I think he would come in right away and be a very, very good receiver. Could he be A.D. Mitchell, like the A.D. Mitchell type ad for Texas? I don't know. That's yet to be seen. We won't really know that until next year. But I think it's telling that Steve Wiltfong and others throughout the industry, right when this guy entered his name into the portal, crystal balled Matthew Golden to Texas. And for those of you who just joined the show, we're talking about the portal. We're talking about Texas needs and targets in the portal, what I'm hearing. And Matthew Golden is a big piece to this wide receiver puzzle that we've been laying out here for the past 5-10 minutes. Very, very good player. Very good on special teams. I think there's a mutual interest from what we're hearing. And I think Matthew Golden, here in the next week or so, very likely will end up a Texas Longhorn. I think Texas is kind of slow playing the portal more so than anything. As obviously we know, National Signing Day is coming up in recruiting. But one of the reasons Texas is now so successful on and off the football field as a football program is that they're not just taking anybody off the streets in the portal or in recruiting. They want the best of the best. They want guys who fit their culture, fit the program, who fit the needs of the program, and are going to come in and not cause chaos in the locker room. They're not going to break up what a good thing that is now going in the locker room for Texas. They want guys who are going to come in, work their ass off, and contribute to championship football. And I think Matthew Golden, with his clear interest in the Texas football program, would be that kind of guy. And he'd be a guy that not only would contribute right away at the receiver position, but a speed guy that would help to replace some of the production that Texas is going to be losing in Xavier Worthy on special teams. I think Matthew Golden probably ends up at Texas based on everything that we're hearing so far, given that he just entered his name into the portal 5-ish hours ago, 6-ish hours ago. But get to know the names, Matthew Golden and Juice Wells. There are probably other names out there. There are still names that are going to enter the portal that aren't in the portal yet, and maybe Texas knows something we don't. They know of a guy that is going to enter the portal but just hasn't yet, and they're going to get that guy. We don't know that. That might totally be the case, but I think if I had to pick between Matthew Golden and Juice Wells, who's more likely based on what I'm hearing, I think Matthew Golden would be a very likely candidate to end up a Texas Longhorn. And go back and watch the Houston game. He was a big-time player in that game. It was for Houston this year. So I think he fits this Texas offense. I need to do a little bit more digging into Matthew Golden. And who knows, maybe by the next time I do another show, Matthew Golden will be a Texas Longhorn, and we can dive deeper into him as a player. That might very well be the case. But Matthew Golden and Juice Wells are guys you need to keep in mind at the receiver position, because the receiver position might be the biggest need in the portal for Texas. It's up there, just with what I laid out earlier. The fact that they're with Whittington, Worthy, and Mitchell leaving likely, they're going to be left with 6 scholarship wide receivers, not a whole lot of proven experience there, 8 total catches from the 6 guys at the college level, all 8 of those coming from Jonte Cook, and no juniors or seniors. So I think they're going to get at least 2, but they're likely going to need 3 in the portal, given that 2 of those true freshmen who are coming in are coming off injuries. And you don't want to rush those guys back from injury. So that's the position I'm focused on. Another guy that I'm focused on in the portal, who entered his name shortly after the portal opened, is Trey Moore. And I'm guessing most of you who aren't psychos about college football don't know who Trey Moore is, if I had to take a guess. So after I take a sip from the mysterious liquid inside of this mug, I will tell you more about Trey Moore. Okay. So, Trey Moore is from UTSA, UT San Antonio. And the important thing you need to know about Trey Moore is he is a linebacker. He's an edge player. And he won Defensive Conference Player of the Year in the American Conference this year. One of the better pass rushers in the country. And you can never have enough pass rushers in football nowadays days with all the offense that we see. Texas is his dream school. But the sense is throughout the industry that it's going to come down to Texas and Ohio State for the services of Trey Moore. I think he's going to take an official visit to Ohio State here in the next couple of days, but he already was on the Texas campus this past weekend making a visit. And I think the sense is that he wants to play for Texas. Like, that's been his dream. And he's a really good player. I mean, all you need to know is that Ohio State and likely other schools around the country really want this guy. One of the best players at his level of college football this past year, 14 and a half sacks. I'll take that on my team. I don't care where he's coming from. I think Texas, there's mutual interest here, and I think from what I've heard, Texas and Trey Moore could happen by the end of this week. After he takes that Ohio State visit, I think it's very likely shortly thereafter he'll make a decision likely in favor of the Longhorns. And You add him to a group next year that consists of Colin Simmons, who you're bringing in, Ethan Burke, who's played very well this year, the freshman from the 2023 class, Colton Vasic from Westlake High School, who was a borderline 5-star prospect from that 2023 class, Jamon Tapp. I mean, Texas will be loaded at the edge position, the pass rush position going into next year. It'd be nice, though, to add a guy of this caliber. Baron Sorrell is probably going to come back, as he hasn't really had the season that he hoped would maybe propel him off to the NFL at the end of this year. I think it's likely that Trey Moore probably ends up at Texas. And a lot of Texas fans are kind of worried about what that could or might mean for Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons wants to play and compete for championships. Colin Simmons has been 100% bought in to this Texas football program. And I think what the Texas staff and what Colin Simmons understands himself is that this isn't all about Colin Simmons. And if Texas gets the opportunity to bring in a really high caliber level of player like Trey Moore from UTSA, who was the American Conference Player of the Year and was one of the nation leaders in sacks with 14 sacks this past year and over 20 sacks in the past 2 years, Texas is going to capitalize on that opportunity, especially when the guy, he's an in-state kid. He wants to play for Texas. He has interest in Texas. And you can never have enough bodies there at the edge rush position. And Texas really has never gotten a guy through the portal of his caliber at that position. They've tried a couple times, but nothing has really come to fruition. And I think if we end this week and Trey Moore, the edge from UTSA, and say Matthew Golden, the receiver from Houston, are both Longhorns here in the next week or so, that's a very, very, very good start to the 2024 Texas transfer portal recruiting class. Those two players alone make next year's team exponentially better. As we know, Texas is going to be losing a lot of key contributors to this year's college football playoff level of caliber team. I think Texas is to the point as a program, though, where they don't have to rebuild. They can kind of reload on the fly with the way that they've been recruiting, the way that they're stacking recruiting classes, which we broke down earlier and we will continue to break down throughout this next week leading up to signing day, and what they've proven to do through the portal. Last year, getting a guy like A.D. Mitchell. Texas isn't where it is right now without A.D. Mitchell. It's just a fact in the matter. And Texas has the opportunity to bring in these great players. They're going to do it. I think it's likely that at least one of those two guys are Longhorns by the end of this week. Probably both, Trey Moore and Matthew Golden, the receiver from Houston, who, if you watch the Houston game this year, there was a reason why Texas struggled to cover in that game. It wasn't just the secondary's bad. Because we've seen the past couple weeks that the Texas secondary actually can be pretty good. And the quarterbacks that they played the past couple of weeks in Tech and in Oklahoma State weren't really all that much better or worse than what they faced at Houston when Donovan Smith, who, of course, was Tech's quarterback last year. We know how Texas lost to Tech last year. He's kind of had Texas's number a little bit, but these guys really aren't all that much different at the quarterback spot. There was a reason that Texas struggled to cover in that game. It wasn't just the concepts that in the scheme and the X's and O's. It was Matthew Golden at the receiver position for Houston. And given what Texas has or is probably going to have exiting the playoff this year, once Worthy and Mitchell likely to declare for the draft, that's the expectation at this point, and Jordan Whittington, no eligibility left, graduates, they're going to have 6 scholarship wide receivers on the roster, 3 of which will be true freshmen coming in this recruiting class that will sign next Wednesday on signing day. The most experienced of which will be Jonte Cook, who has 8 career receptions. He's going to be a great player. We know that. I'm very excited about Jonte Cook as a young player, but he'd be the most experienced receiver on the Texas roster going into January, February as it currently stands with the situation that Texas finds itself in, with two or three guys likely heading to the NFL. And I think Matthew Golden would be a very good start to adding a couple much needed bodies and experience to that receiver room. And I think Trey Moore would do the same on defense. He could come in and join a rotation, which will consist of Colin Simmons, who's going to get some playing time right away as a true freshman. We'll talk more about him later this week, going into next week when we break down the full class. Ethan Burke, who's been a much-needed contributor to this Texas team this year. 4-star edge rusher out of Westlake in last year's recruiting class. Colton Vasek, who has redshirted this year, hasn't played much, but he was a borderline 5-star edge rush prospect who Texas flipped from Oklahoma last year. And he was a big get in that recruiting class. He's probably going to play some next year. Barron Sorrell, who hasn't necessarily had the season that I think his dad Barry or anybody thought he would have in terms of sheer production and numbers, although he's still been a very good player and contributor to this Texas defense. He could possibly be back next year, as I don't think he's had the type of season he hoped he would have that maybe would propel him to the NFL. Again, Texas is going to need at least 5 bodies in the portal. I think they're going to, as we talked about, they're going to need 2, possibly even 3 receivers, given the attrition at the wide receiver position. And we know that they'll address that. Sark always will have his quarterbacks and his wide receivers. You don't need to worry about that if you're a Texas fan. Whether it's high school guys in recruiting, guys like Ryan Wingo, who they're going to bring in, guys like Jonte Cook, who they brought in last year, or guys through the portal like A.D. Mitchell. They're always going to find a way to have a really good receiving core, and a deep one at that. They're always going to have quarterbacks. We know that already. But I think you add Trey Moore, guy who had 14 and a half sacks this year at UTSA, was a all-conference caliber player at a position that is worth its weight in gold at all levels of football. Edge rusher there aren't a lot of guys of Trey Moore's ilk that come available every day. And a guy that wants to play for Texas, at least that's what we're hearing from behind the scenes, Texas is going to add those guys. NIL opportunities, so forth. Like, I think it's very likely both those guys will be Longhorns here in the next week or two. Very likely. I use that term because things can change, but very, very likely. Steve Wiltfong, who's rarely wrong. Crystal Ball, Matthew Golden to Texas, right as Matthew Golden announced he was in the portal today or this afternoon. And when Steve Wiltfong speaks, I listen. So very, very exciting times in the world of Texas Longhorns. And those are just 2 bodies that we talked about. I think Texas is going to look for probably an interior defensive lineman. They're going to need that because we all know what they're going to lose with Tavondre Sweat and likely Byron Murphy going to the NFL. They're going to need a body or 2 on that interior of the defensive line. I think that if Jatavion Sanders ends up declaring for the NFL draft, They will likely look for a tight end, as tight end really wasn't a part or isn't going to be a part of this 2024 recruiting class. But with Gunnar Helm coming back, you can at least say you have a solid tight end coming back. But I think Texas will look for another body if Ja'Tavion Sanders does go to the NFL. And I think Texas could probably use another body in the secondary. Now, as we talked about at the beginning of this episode, expectation is Texas is going to land high 4-star, borderline 5-star corner from Waco Connolly High School, Kobe Black, tomorrow afternoon, as he's going to announce his decision, which is coming down to Texas and Oklahoma State. We broke that down at the beginning, so once everything is said and done here, you can go back and watch that part of the show. I'm not going to rehash that right now, but I think the expectation is they're going to get Kobe Black, they're going to add him to this class, and they're going to flip Xavier Filsaime, who's a borderline 5-star safety prospect who's been committed to Florida since the spring. They're going to flip him as he's going to take an official visit, or is expected to take an official visit, to Texas this weekend. And once he takes that visit, that tells you all you need to know. If you're taking an official visit to a school 3 days before signing day, you wouldn't be doing that. You just wouldn't be wasting your time if you were shutting down your recruitment at that point. And Texas has been on his ass ever since he was committed to Florida. And that's, once again, one of the reasons I love this coaching staff and what they do in recruiting so much. They recruit through the damn whistle. They don't give up on guys once they commit elsewhere. Because Texas knows, we're Texas. Now we have a fucking college football playoff appearance to sell these guys. We actually have the success on the field to go along with everything else that we can offer. The academics, the NIL opportunities, being in Austin, Texas, for Pete's sake. Everything else, the coaching staff, developing, putting guys in the NFL. All these things play into these guys' decisions. Playing in the SEC going into next year. I mean, now you have the on-field success to go with it. The expectation is they're going to add both those guys in recruiting, maybe another body or two as well. Early signing period is next Wednesday. They might flip another guy or two before the actual signing day, or the second signing day, which occurs first week of February. And then they're probably going to land one or two bodies in the portal here very soon. Two of those names which we broke down here tonight. There are other names out there too. Juice Wells is another possibility at the wide receiver position from South Carolina. He's a name we've been hearing for a while. There are names out there. Names that haven't even entered the transfer portal yet. That maybe are waiting to enter the portal until after their team said bowl game. Or maybe they're waiting on some things to happen at their particular school. Or still weighing their decisions. That could enter the portal. That I think Texas has a better idea behind the scenes. We think this guy's going to enter the portal. That's a guy maybe we're going to target once he does. But we just don't know that from the outside looking in. We just know the guys that have entered the portal so far. So, very exciting times off the field and on the field as a Texas Longhorn football fan. I'm a psycho about this stuff, as you guys can probably tell. I love this stuff. And look, this is the stuff that has led Texas to where they are right now. It's recruiting and player development. That's basically what it boils down to in college football. And we've seen both sides of it this year, big time. The work that they did to flip Anthony Hill from Texas A&M, prior to last year's signing day to really solidify that historic 2023 recruiting class. You saw the plays that Anthony Hill made over the last couple of weeks of the season as a 5-star linebacker, really talented freshman All-American, now Anthony Hill, forcing that fumble. I mean, he's been a monster. He's going to be a monster. What he's already done as a true freshman. That's recruiting. Previous Texas staffs don't flip Anthony Hill from Texas A&M. It just doesn't happen. But this Texas staff, they continue to recruit through the whistle. And that's what a lot of Texas fans don't understand. Previous year, 2022, coming off a 5-7 season, mind you. Bad season. 6-game losing streak, terrible. Wasn't a good first year under Stark. They were able to flip Kelvin Banks from Oregon. And once again, there were extenuating circumstances. The coaching change. Of course, now they have Dan Lanning. They figured that out up in Eugene. But Texas continued to recruit Kelvin Banks even when he had committed to Oregon. They continued to work on him. They chipped away. And they finally, when the opportunity presented itself, they seized that opportunity. And they were able to flip an All-American type player in Kelvin Banks, who's been a stalwart on this offensive line for now 2 full seasons and will be again next year. And if he stays healthy, will be a top 10 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. I mean, those are just a couple of examples. So it's recruiting and player development. We've seen both sides of it. T'Vondre Sweat, 3-star defensive lineman. I'm not calling out 3 stars. There are some really damn good 3 stars that are playing college football right now. But T'Vondre Sweat he's a good player last year. But he wasn't this level. You think he just did that by himself? He's the Outland Trophy winner, which we haven't even mentioned yet. I totally forgot. The best lineman in college football, defensive or offensive. He won that award. The first Texas player to do so since 1977. That's player development, man. Same thing with Byron Murphy. Same thing with a guy like Jahdae Barron in the secondary. Same thing with the improvements of Jaron Thompson. Christian Jones, perfect example at right tackle. Texas fans hated Christian Jones 2 years ago. Now he's a all Big 12 caliber player, all conference caliber player. One of the best tackles in the country. Probably going to make it to the NFL. He's got a Senior Bowl invite. It tells you everything you need to know. The list goes on, guys. So very, very exciting times. We'll continue to break down recruiting and transfer portal here in the next week, leading up to signing day. Now, what are we? 20 days away from Texas and Washington. I take a sip of my water. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. For the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to talk some college hoops. Then we're going to get out of here for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow for more. Because tomorrow, we have the Kobe Black decision, which I broke down earlier. We have the release of the 2024 SEC football schedule tomorrow evening. So we will know when and where and what week and what order Texas will be playing the opponents that they have in their first year of the SEC next year. We know some things already. We know that they're going to play Michigan in non-conference in Ann Arbor, in what could potentially be a rematch of maybe a national championship game. Potentially, we know that they're going to play Georgia in Austin on October 19th. We know that A&M will be the last game of the season, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. But we don't know the rest. We don't know that the order of the other teams that they're going to play. Mississippi State, Florida. I think they're playing Vanderbilt, Oklahoma. The schools that they're going to play, we don't know the exact order. Kentucky, we don't know the exact order which those games are going to occur. So we'll be breaking down the SEC schedule as well. And then we'll probably talk some more recruiting, transfer portal rumors, and we'll finish up whatever college basketball I don't get to here in the next 10-ish minutes. We're about a month or so into college basketball season. A little over a month and a weekish, 5 weeks into the college basketball season. And I wanted to just kind of talk about my championship tier. According to me, because I'm a big college basketball fanatic, who are the teams that I watch and say, these teams check the boxes for making deep runs in March, for contending to lift that trophy in early April, for winning March Madness? Who has the ingredients to really do that? I think there are 5 or 6 teams that, as of right now, I would consider national championship contenders. I might not get to all of them right now, as eventually I want to save my voice for podcasts down the line and for going to work and things of that nature. But I want to start with Arizona. Arizona and mainly Purdue. Arizona and Purdue. We'll start there. Arizona right now, I believe, is the number 1 team in the country. They're undefeated. They're 8-0. And I'll start here. One of the main reasons they are in my championship tier right now is not just because they're undefeated and not just because they passed the eye test. Those are 2 of the ingredients. We'll talk more about the eye test here in a minute. But they've tested themselves early in non-conference, and they've beaten some quality competition. That's a very important ingredient to this particular segment and what I consider for this bubble of championship caliber teams. A lot of these teams that I think are really, really good, have been beaten up on crap for the first month of the college basketball season. Arizona, though, they've tested themselves. They went into Cameron Indoor at Duke, second game of the year. That's a tough place to win. It's loud at Cameron Indoor. I've been there for a game, Texas-Virginia game, back a couple of years ago in the Virginia National Championship year. And Cameron Indoor, man, it's tough to win there. And they beat a really talented Duke team on the road, 78-73. They've also beaten Michigan State, who is mightily struggling this year so far. They were a top 5-ish caliber team coming into the preseason. They were ranked top 5. That's another reason to not pay attention to preseason polls, pretty much in any college sport, much less college basketball for that matter. But they beat Michigan State. And then most recently, they beat down Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a really good team. They're probably a top 4-ish team in the Big Ten. They defend under Greg Gard. They beat their ass, 98-73 at home. Arizona ran them out of the building. defensive team. They almost hung 100 on them, 98-73. So Arizona checks the first box. They tested themselves in non-conference. They're going to test themselves again this weekend in what potentially is the game of the year so far in college basketball, as they will face Purdue on Saturday. We're going to get to Purdue here in a minute. They're probably the next best team in college basketball, in my opinion. I mean, this is two stalwarts going at it. So they've tested themselves. They're also going to play Alabama thereafter. Alabama's a really good team in the SEC. They're going to play Florida Atlantic. They're testing themselves big time in non-conference before they enter Pac-12 play. And there will be some good opportunities for quality wins in Pac-12 play, but they've really built up this non-conference, and Arizona is looking really, really good. Alabama, Florida Atlantic, and Purdue, their next 3 games, those are all top 25-ish caliber teams. And I think Arizona has a very good chance the way that they're playing to win 2 out of 3, even 3 out of 3 of those games. I think they're the number 1 team in the country. Really good offensively. They're 5th in adjusted offensive efficiency, according to KenPom, with a 119.9 rating. They're 2nd in defensive efficiency, according to KenPom, with the 89.9 defensive rating. They're efficient offensively. They're shooting the ball well, 57.9% effective field goal percentage. That's 11th in the country. They're crashing the boards on both sides. They're 1st in defensive rebound percentage. They are 8th in offensive rebound percentage. They're shooting the 39% clip so far this year. That's top 25 in the country. They're 16th in field goal percentage. They're just a really, really good team under Tommy Lloyd, who is one of the best coaches in college basketball, period. You bring a guy like Caleb Love, the transfer from North Carolina, a guy who's built to score the basketball, but was a liability last year in Chapel Hill. Bad shot selection, has a tendency to take some bad shots, not the most efficient player in the world, can fill it up. And when he's hot, man, he's a thrill to watch. But has a tendency as a player to kind of, when he's cold, it doesn't look very good, was inefficient on the offensive end of the floor at times, and wasn't bought in defensively. Kind of a liability defensively, to be quite honest with you, on that Carolina team. That's one of the reasons Carolina started last year ranked number 1 and did not make the tournament. And I'm not blaming it on Caleb Love, but they weren't a good defensive team last year at North Carolina, and Caleb Love played a part in that. This year, Caleb Love is actually bought in defensively. Whatever Tommy Lloyd has done, credit to him. And Arizona looks really, really good. Caleb Love's playing well on the offensive end. He's knocking down shots. 49.5% effective field goal percentage. Playing good on balls. They get Keyshawn Johnson, the senior forward transfer from San Diego State, who's one of the best defensive players in the country, period, from that San Diego State Final Four team a year ago. He's really elevated them defensively. We know about Umar Ballo, the big 7-footer on the interior, who very adept at scoring around the basket, blocking shots, etc., etc. You have Kylan Boswell and Pele Larson. Pele Larson, a really good shooter to pair with Caleb Love in that backcourt. They've got guard play. They've got defense. They've got shot blocking. Arizona really checks all of the boxes. Good head coach, guard play. They've tested themselves in non-conference. They've beaten some really goddamn good teams, both on the road and at home. They're going to have a chance to continue to do so here in the near future. And a lot of their metrics tell you that, along with the eye test, that they are set up to be a national championship contender as long as they stay healthy. We'll talk more about Arizona as the season goes on here in the near future as we continue our college basketball conversation. The next team I'd like to quickly point out is Purdue. Purdue, if you remember, they've been a really good program here for the past couple of years under Matt Painter. But a big part of that being Zach Edey, the monster that is Zach Edey. But they haven't had a whole lot of success come March. They've had early exits from the tournament. Last year, losing to, I believe it was Farley Dickinson, the second ever 16 seed, to upset a 1 seed. If you guys remember that wildness that unfolded in last year's tournament. As a lover of March Madness, how could you not? But Purdue, again, checks a lot of these boxes. They played in the Maui Invitational, which is one of the best MTVs that we have right now in college basketball, early season tournaments. And on neutral course, they got 3 consecutive wins on 3 consecutive days against Gonzaga, Tennessee, and Marquette. Gonzaga, Tennessee, and Marquette. Those are 3 top 15 caliber college basketball teams this year. They beat Gonzaga by 10. They beat Tennessee 71-67 under former Texas coach Rick Barnes. And they beat Marquette, who under Shaka Smart, another former Texas coach, ironically, they beat Marquette 78-75 after Marquette had just run Kansas out of the building. Marquette's really good. I'll talk about them later on. They also just beat this past weekend Alabama 92-86 in what was a fantastic game on a neutral site. Their only loss so far was to Northwestern 92-88 on the road in overtime, but that was, I think, coming off an emotional, long travel, hard-fought tournament in Maui. There are extenuating circumstances sometimes in college athletics that allow for these type of unexpected losses or upsets to occur. And that those kind of things happen in college basketball. And Purdue wasn't going to go undefeated as good as they are. Nobody, I don't think, is going undefeated this year. But, I mean, they've beaten some really, really good teams. Like, their resume is already worthy of being a 1 or 2 seed in the tournament. And again, just like Arizona, they pass a lot of the smell test as well. They're third in offensive efficiency, 122. They are 10th in defensive efficiency, 92.4. They are really, really good shooting the ball. That's been an area they've struggled with the past couple of years. 40% from 3. That's 15th in the country. And with the monster that is Zach Edey on the interior, the 7'4", 300-pound some monster on the interior who's, gosh, I need to look up his numbers. Allow me real fast to look up his numbers, who's basically good for 30 points and 10 rebounds on a good night for him as a monster that he is. What is he averaging so far this year? Good goodness. If he stays healthy, he's a lock for first team All-American. 24.8 points and 10 rebounds as a college basketball player is insane. On 63% shooting. He's a monster. He's the fulcrum of their team. They put him in pick and rolls. He's dominant on the interior. But the experience that they had coming back at the guard position with Fletcher Lawyer, who's a sophomore, coming back for another year, and Braden Smith, who's a sophomore, coming back for another year at the point guard position, that was really the issue last year. Inconsistency from their guard play, especially going into the tournament. With those guys getting a year under their belt, we've seen it already. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer have been very, very good. And they're a big reason why Purdue is where they are right now, is one of the best teams in the country. So Arizona and Purdue, elite college basketball teams, and they're going to play each other this Saturday, which is going to be quite the scene. This Saturday in college basketball I cannot wait. I'm drooling over the slate in basketball this Saturday, and maybe that's where we'll finish tonight's show. There are a bunch more teams I'm going to talk about more in depth, and we can get to that as we continue on tomorrow's show. But let me just real fast, if you are into this sort of thing, you like college basketball, let's just real fast look at the upcoming slate on Saturday in college basketball. So Texas is going to play LSU. Texas is ranked 19th right now. We'll talk more about them later on this week. That'll be a good game. But we're going to get Kansas and Indiana. We're going to get Baylor and Michigan State. Baylor's another team which I'll talk about here very soon. A&M and Houston. Houston's ranked number 4. Arizona and Purdue, as I said. North Carolina and Kentucky. It's always a great game. Alabama and Creighton. I mean, there are so many good matchups going into Saturday in college basketball. I believe there's one on Friday as well. UConn and Gonzaga will face off on Friday at 9 on ESPN2. I'll be watching that too. So lots more in-depth college basketball talk. We'll continue this segment going into tomorrow's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed everything that we talked about tonight. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, big time week in both recruiting and the transfer portal for the Longhorns on the football side of things. We're also going to eventually start talking about college football playoff, as I'm sure a lot of you want to start talking about the matchup against Washington. We'll certainly do that. But major recruiting decision coming tomorrow for the Longhorns. There could be a flip here in the next week. We could start to see names out of the portal that we talked about earlier in the show commit to the Longhorns, such as Matthew Golden, the Houston wide receiver, and Trey Moore, the UTSA linebacker, commit to Texas here very soon. There are other needs that we broke down, and we talked about we got at least a start on our conversation about college basketball. So tomorrow, before I get out of here, as I'm getting tired of talking, we've got more recruiting and transfer portal stuff. We've got potentially breaking down the commitment of one Kobe Black. We've got more college basketball talk, and the SEC schedule for 2024 comes out tomorrow evening. So we'll know the order in which Texas will play its games next year. We already kind of know when they're going to play Georgia. We know when they're going to play A&M. We know when they're going to play Michigan in non-conference, but we don't know the order of everything else. So we'll find that out. We'll break that down. Thank you guys for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Have a great Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow for another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, along with some other content coming here very soon on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel with my good co-host, Emmy Nixon. Hook 'em horns. Peace out. Have a great Tuesday.